excited to welcome you to the very first What Now podcast. My name is Adam and I am on the What Now team, and we are super excited about our new journey together. Our only goal for this podcast is for you, someone who just gave their life to Christ, or someone searching, asking questions about Jesus. We want you to get to know Jesus better. That is our only goal for this podcast. And on this episode with me today is Mitch. What's up, Mitch?
What's up, guys?
If you notice, I'm a tad bit older than Mitch. That's because I was his student pastor 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And so this is season 1 called Please Excuse My Imagination. And our first story comes today from Mark chapter 5. Also, if you would like a audio narrative of this story, it is found on our audio narrative podcast called Please Excuse My Imagination. And that's found on Spotify and is found on Apple. You ready?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, let's go. So Mark chapter 5, we see Jesus comes to this village, and in this village is a man named Jairus. He's a respected man in the village, and his daughter gets sick. And he's done everything he could possibly do for his daughter, but she's not getting better, she's getting worse. So he hears that Jesus is coming into the village, and he's heard all this stuff that Jesus has done. And he goes, okay, so maybe he can heal my daughter. So he goes to the shore, meets Jesus. Jesus agrees to go with him. As they're walking, they meet a woman who has been sick for 12 years. And we'll get more into her story in a little bit. But she stops. She's healed, and Jesus has stopped. And as he's talking to her, Jairus finds out that his daughter's dead. Then Jesus continues on this journey with Jairus to the house, and he resurrects his daughter. An amazing miracle. It was incredible. So what is your first takeaway from this story?
Yeah, I think the first takeaway that I got is kind of the contrast between Jairus and the woman, and how Jesus meets both of them in the midst of their respective stories. Even though they're two very different stories, Jesus is allowed to meet both of them where they're at and heal them on a personal level and be intentional about that despite the differences between the two. Yeah,
I thought my very first instinct was figuring out, why would Jesus go with him? And then that kind of taught me, that Jesus will go with us.
Yeah.
No matter what situation that's going on in our life, Jesus will actually walk with us along the journey. It's funny that it doesn't say that Jesus says, "Yeah, I'll go heal her." There's not a record of anything Jesus says to Jairus. It's just that it said he will walk with him. Yeah. And so I just imagine. Can you imagine that walk? Yeah. Imagine the walk that maybe Jairus was, telling him stories about, his little girl and how awesome she was. And Jesus is probably smiling and, having fun and just talking with him. Yeah. And it's just a chat. And, put yourself in Jairus' shoes right there. What's going on there in your head?
Well, I think it's just angst, and a lot of times you want to know that. I think if he was telling stories to Jesus, like kind of trying to like be personable and just like, does Jesus care? Like, and all this stuff, he's telling stories like how important his daughter is to him and stuff like that. So I think I'm not a father. As a father, I feel like there's a lot of angst there, and I think he might be a little chatty or just anxious.
Yeah. I go back to Isaiah 43. It says that I will walk with you. That says that he's redeemed us. He has summoned us by name. How awesome is that to know that God says, I know you. I've summoned you by name. You're mine. And it says, even though you walk through the fire, you won't be burned. Yeah. Isaiah God didn't tell Isaiah, when you walk through fire, I'm just going to pick you up out of it.
Yeah. And he never promises that you wouldn't walk through fire.
Yeah, that was so cool. And because could Jesus had healed his little girl by just saying, hey, okay, she's better. Yeah.
I mean, there's other stories in the Bible that say that Jesus healed someone from afar. He said, "Go, your son."
Yeah. So I think this entire walk that Jesus takes with Jairus is I think it's a great picture of the walk, our walk with Jesus. I think this is why we chose this story to be our very first podcast discussion, because I think it is a great picture of our lives, that we meet Jesus, we walk with us, and now something's about to happen that he wasn't prepared for. You know, as a dad, when my kids have gotten sick, I want the answer now. Yeah. I want the answer immediately. And I think Jairus was like that. He knew the plan. Let me get to shore. Yeah. Get with Jesus. And then I'm going to have Jesus walk the 15 minutes back to my house. Yeah. And heal my little girl. Nothing's going to stop, because Jairus was a respected man in the community. Yeah. You know, tell us.
Well, he was a Pharisee, and that was kind of a religious party at the time. And so he was a well-respected member of the temple or the church at the time. And so in the Bible, it says that he had tried everything. And I think that is where his journey starts, is coming to the end of himself, where Jairus, as this had a lot of status. He's probably a little bit older in his community. He probably had tried doctors. He tried everything to heal his daughter, and yet she wasn't getting better. In fact, she was getting worse. Yeah. And so out of desperation and hearing these stories about Jesus and the miracles he worked, going to where Jesus was, and it says he fell at the feet of Jesus, which is a humble moment. When you fall at the feet of somebody else, you're desperate. You say, "I need you to come help my daughter."
Jairus, he was the synagogue leader. So basically what it was is he was like a principal of a high school. Okay. They don't teach at all. But they're in charge of everything. So Jairus had heard stories from other synagogue leaders, probably. When Jesus comes into your building, he is going to mess your building up. It's not because he's done it. It's because the crowd's going to fill, and it's going to add. So he's probably nervous. He's like, "Oh, Jesus is coming." Yeah. But his little girl was sick, so he didn't care about that. Yeah. And so then something happened that he didn't plan for. A lady who had been sick for 12 years. 12 years. She had her period for 12 years. Both of us are guys, so we're not going to know about that. Yeah. But can you just imagine, COVID is something major that happened that we're all, and we're from Georgia, and it wasn't terribly, we weren't terribly isolated. There was a couple weeks where we had to isolate in place, and we couldn't really leave. And can you imagine that lasting for 12 years? Because
she was considered ceremonially unclean in Jewish culture. So that meant that she had to stay away from her husband, stay away from other people, and just be completely isolated from everybody else.
Yeah. So she had a family. Yeah. I mean, because the scripture does say that she spent all that she had. Oh, yeah. And in those times, a woman only had property when it was referenced by a man, either her dad or her husband. So she had some sort of family. Yeah. But she couldn't, like you said, she couldn't touch anybody. Yeah. And so that lasted for 12 years. Can you imagine not touching someone for 12 years? She's probably that lady on the street that's like, nobody go near her. Yeah. So she's at rock bottom at this point.
Well, I think that's one thing. You talk about the differences between Jairus and the woman, and I think that's one thing they have in common, is that they had both tried by their own power and by their own means to fix their situation and come up short, and they had come to the end of themselves, and that is where they are allowed to, or they come to Jesus at that point, at the end of themselves.
Yeah. Faith happens at the end of human limitations. Yeah. So she she was at rock bottom, just like Jairus at this point. He had no other motive. He had nothing else would help. So he had to go to Jesus. She had nothing else but to fight the crowd of mainly men.
Yeah.
And she's been sick for 12 years. So she's weak, but she fights through to get to Jesus. And what does Jesus do? What does he do?
Well, he feels the power go out from him, and he stops and he turns around. He says, "Who just touched me?" And this is what I think is really interesting is obviously the crowd is there. They're all pressing in. Peter says, "Jesus, there's a huge crowd. Everybody is touching you. So like, why are you saying who touched me?" And Jesus says, "No, someone touched me in faith, and I felt power go out from me. So who touched me?"
Yeah.
And he harps on it, and he doesn't let it go until the woman says, trembling, comes forward and says everything. She comes completely clean and tells him her entire story.
Why? Okay. We like to imagine here a little bit. Why is she scared? Well, if you were in her position and you had been healed from something, you probably were having a party.
Yeah.
But she was scared. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think she wasn't supposed to touch people, let alone a prominent rabbi who Jesus was considered to be a big teacher at the time, a preacher. And so she had broken the law, and I feel like she was going to feel ashamed and convicted in that. I feel like she might have thought Jesus turned around as like, who just touched me? Like, let's punish her, or whoever it was that just touched me, let's punish them because they stole something from me. Because she didn't ask, "Hey, Jesus, can you heal me?" She just reached out and was healed.
It's culture.
Yeah.
Culture made her afraid.
Yeah.
And what did Jesus do? Jesus said he listened to her whole story. And then he says something that he never said in any of the other gospels. He said daughter. He called her daughter.
Yeah.
Because she had probably lost, her. She lost her identity.
Yeah.
Because she didn't belong to anybody anymore. Either her dad died, or he was, or he just wasn't in the picture anymore. Or the same thing with her husband. Her husband either died, or her kids had died, or they just left her. She was all by herself, and so she was alone. And so Jesus is saying, "You're mine."
Yeah.
Giving her identity, giving her herself back, and that's the. And then he listened to her whole story. Yeah. Nobody had probably talked to her in 12 years.
And I don't even know if anybody cared. You know what I mean? At a certain point, it's like, oh, that's just that outcast, that crazy lady. Nobody really, I don't know if anyone had ever asked her story, or even within recent years, even cared about her story. But Jesus says, no, I don't want to just let you be healed and me keep walking.
Yeah.
But he intentionally turns around and he says, I don't only care about your physical health, but your mental health. Let me redeem your story and speak identity back over you. No, you're not an outcast who just so happened to be healed because I'm a healer and I'm a miracle worker. But let me call you and invite you into family by calling her daughter and kind of renewing her story.
It was cool that he stopped.
Yeah.
I mean, he just stopped. Everybody pressing in, and he stopped for this little lady who moved mountains to get there. Yeah. And it's really cool. Jesus says, daughter, your faith has healed you. Not the action of pushing through the crowd, not the action of touching the hem of his garment, but it was her faith. And I think, when we're struggling, as long as we have just a little bit of faith, and, we can push through a crowd to get to Jesus because it's our faith.
I think it's almost like faith married with the desperation, because I think it was the faith that pushed her through the faith and the desperation that pushed her through the crowd and that had her touch the hem of his garment, because it would have been easy to have faith where you just hang back and you say, oh, well, if and this is a lot of times what people try, in church, they can try to like catch a miracle. like as it's passing by, where you just sit and you say, oh, well, I have faith that if Jesus is in the proximity, then maybe I'll be healed by just being near him. But her faith was, if I touch the hem of his garment. And that belief with her desperation drove her to push through the crowd and to touch the hem of his garment, because there was no other option.
Yeah. Now if we go back to the main person of the story, we just sat here and talked the 5 to 7 minutes on a secondary story.
And the whole time Jairus is sitting in the background,
he's
like
freaking out. I wonder if he's freaking. Have you ever seen the Chosen show? Well, the scene that they display at this part is Jairus is just sitting in the background, kind of smiling and grinning and going, "Oh man, this is great." I don't think I could do that. I think I'd be freaking out.
Yeah, just like, okay.
Just
great,
like,
let's
just
go.
like what you said, he like just a miracle passing by. But what if Jairus was like, did he just waste his power on her? I mean, you don't know. This thing was unplanned. Walking with Jesus doesn't go how we want it to go sometimes. There are things that happen along the way that weren't planned. You told a great story, like our first production meeting, about COVID and about how COVID messed up your high school plans. Tell that story.
Yeah. So, I mean, nothing ever goes to plan.
No.
So high school, this is funny. Junior year, I skipped prom because I was like, I'll just go senior year. Senior prom is good enough for me. And yet I get senior year and it gets to be around February and COVID starts to kick up. You hear about it overseas, and then you hear about it, a few cases in the US, and then, hey, we're going to shut down for 2 weeks. And it's actually, we're shutting down for the rest of the semester. All school events are canceled. And so this included my senior prom. I was in theater. So my senior show that I was like one of the leads in, and it just kind of completely disrupted what I thought my life was going to be for the last semester of high school. And for a long time, I was just so like upset about that. But looking back, that gave me a lot of time to read my Bible, be in the Word, and I was able to draw closer to God with all the free time we all suddenly had. And I feel like it was a pivotal part in my life to where I was able to turn towards and recognize God in a more rich way.
The cool thing, we referenced this at the beginning. Yes, Jesus could have healed his daughter at the shore. But sometimes walking with Jesus isn't about the destination. It's about the lessons that you learn along the way.
And I think it's character development.
Yeah.
And I think it's almost the same as when Jesus turns around and wants to redeem the woman's story, because she was healed instantaneously. Yeah. And yet Jesus wouldn't just leave it at that. He wanted to heal her story and heal her identity and her belief in herself. And so if Jesus healed Jairus' daughter on the shore, Jairus just gets up and walks home. And Jairus never gets to meet Jesus. He never gets to get to know Jesus. And Jesus never gets to walk with Jairus back to his source of fear and anxiety in order to heal it on a personal level. It's almost an impersonal miracle, which I don't think...
That's a good point. Now, here's where, when you're walking with Jesus, he's going to walk with us. Yeah. There are unplanned things happen. Mm-hmm. And then there's nowhere in Scripture does it say you have a relationship with Jesus, you'll never hit rock bottom. Yeah. Because at this point, Jesus is hanging out with the lady. Mm-hmm. Jairus gets the news his daughter's dead. Yeah. Now his whole world at that moment, gone. Mm-hmm. The whole point for going to get Jesus, gone. And I wonder what he felt in that moment, because it's I don't know if it's how Jesus just works just miraculously, because at that moment, Jesus had stopped the conversation with the lady.
It says, as he finished speaking with the woman,
Jesus stood
news
up.
came to Jairus.
Yes, he stood up and he said the only 5 words that was recorded that Jesus said to Jairus: "Don't be afraid, just believe."
Yeah. And I think, because at this point, Jairus was desperate, and he said, my only option is Jesus, because Jesus was a miracle worker and a teacher who heals the sick. He had never raised the dead at this point. And so once he hears she's dead, it's like, okay, this is something beyond Jesus' capability. Like, I'm beyond hope and even beyond Jesus' help of me. And I think that hindsight is easy because we know Jesus to be God and that he's not limited in that way. And we also know that Jesus does heal his daughter. Yeah. But I think if you put yourself in that moment where you never heard of anybody being resurrected from the dead, and you never heard of Jesus resurrecting anybody from the dead, and you might be even a little skeptical that Jesus is God, and you hear your daughter's dead, and you hear your servant say, don't bother the teacher anymore. So it's just like that devastation. And I think even now, we in our daily walks can be tempted, and in our struggles can tempted to say, this is beyond God's help. Like, God either doesn't care to help with this or he can't help with this. But we have to be careful when we say that, because we're limiting God. And I think his response to us is the same as Jesus to Jairus, which is, do not be afraid, only believe.
There's a cool moment that I've been studying, as we've said. I'm a lot older than you, and thanks.
Oh, sorry.
I've been studying this. This is my favorite Bible story of all time, and I've been studying this for years. And you've probably heard me preach this message, a similar version, for 7 years when I was your student pastor. I preached this message at least once a year, just different ways and spins. But something hit me while we were developing the What Now, the website, the podcast, that in that moment when Jairus had just heard that his daughter's dead, he is at rock bottom. Yeah. And he was the most respected man in town. He had hit rock bottom. The woman who was at rock bottom is now in Euphoria. Not the show on HBO. She had Euphoria. And who's in the middle? Jesus. He never changed. I'm in my 40s, you're in your 20s. He's the same. He's the same Jesus to both of us. Yeah. No matter if you've been walking with Jesus for 30, 40 years like I have, and you for in your entire life in your 20s. He's the same. Yeah. No matter if I'm going through rock bottom and your life is on top of the world, he's going to be the same. And I think that I don't know if Jairus felt any comfort when Jesus said those 5 words, but I just wonder I wonder if he just kind of rolled his eyes, and he kind of, like you said, there's no record of Jesus healing, raising anybody from the dead. There's no coming back from dead Jesus. But I wonder if Jesus just kept whispering that to him. Yeah. Don't be afraid. Just believe.
And I think I like that you bring up the contrast and how Jesus doesn't change. And that's another of the differences is the Jairus, his daughter was 12 years old. And so the woman, she had gotten sick around the same time Jairus had this daughter. And Jairus had spent 12 years with blessing with this daughter, like loving his daughter. And this woman had spent 12 years trying to be healed, alienated from her community. And Jesus was able to meet both of those situations, but his response is different. Like, his response based on each of the people was personal, where with the woman, again, we said he turned around and he was personal with her, and he walks with Jairus. And as opposed to an instantaneous miracle with Jairus. Yeah.
Now we get in the story, we get to they get to the house.
Yeah.
And there was already people in the community that were there, and they were crying. Mm-hmm. Now, some of them were probably family members. Mm-hmm. Some of them were friends. But in that tradition, there were also paid mourners.
Yeah,
there.
Professional mourners.
Yeah, I want that job. I want to go cry somewhere and get
Someone
paid.
pay me to cry.
Yeah, and so Jesus says, "What's all this commotion?" Mm-hmm. And they were like, "Really? Jesus, she's dead."
Yeah.
And he goes, "No, she's asleep." Mm-hmm. And then they start laughing at him. But the coolest part of this story, to me, is Jesus. It says after he had thrown them out, mm-hmm. after he had it's the same language used in John chapter 2 when he cleared the temple. He physically threw them out. Mm-hmm. Physically threw them out. Mm-hmm. That was cool because Jesus was like, all right, you're gonna laugh, I'm gonna throw you out.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was pretty cool. Then they go in, and this is the first time Jairus sees his daughter's body. Mm-hmm. What do you think's going on in his head?
I just think that, I haven't dealt with grief a lot. A few years ago, yeah, probably a year and a half ago was the first time I had a really close death. It was my grandfather. And it's just difficult just to see someone in my life who was so lively and so such a blessing to me, just completely not alive and just unanimated. Yeah. And so it's just difficult, and it's difficult just to see it's like the humbling of that person. It's difficult. Yeah.
I wonder if Jairus, just using our imagination, he might have went and thrown himself on his little girl weeping.
Yeah. Because
I've been in that spot. Mm-hmm. Our first son passed away when he was 4 months old. So going and seeing his lifeless body. Yeah. I know a little bit what that is like. Because when I've talked to multiple parents that have lost their kid, and it's different in every situation. Yeah. Even when you lose your grandfather, it's a different feeling. Your brother had a different feeling than you did. Mm-hmm. My wife had a different feeling when our son died than I did. And so I can imagine me throwing myself on my kid's body because I did that. Yeah. And I wonder if Jairus did that. Yeah. And I wonder if Jesus, just he grabbed him and maybe gently picked him up. Yeah. And said those 5 words again. Don't be afraid. Just believe. Mm-hmm. And I wonder what was going on there.
I wonder if the closer you get to the source and the closer you walk with Jesus to the source of your fear and anxiety and your grief, the more you need to hear that, right? Because when you hear someone come and tell you, or when Jairus heard someone come and tell him, hey, your daughter's dead, there's like Jesus saying, don't be afraid, only believe. It's like, oh, maybe he knows something where maybe she's not really dead. She just slipped into a coma or something. But when you're there, when you're standing in front of your daughter's body and it's pretty undeniable that she's dead, that is when you need to hear and you need to believe from Jesus. You need to hear, don't be afraid, just believe.
And then Jesus says, little girl, get up. Mm-hmm. In that moment, funeral's over. There's a party now. Yeah. And, we've referenced this now, I think 3 times. Why didn't Jesus just heal her there? Because I think Jesus wanted to do something. Instead of healing her on the shore, he wanted to do something bigger than just heal a little sick girl. Mm-hmm. What's bigger? Resurrecting somebody from the dead or healing a sick girl? Mm-hmm. Jesus wanted to do something bigger in Jairus' life, because every time, I think it was more than just that little walk. Mm-hmm. It was when his daughter graduated from high school. Yeah. He remembered Jesus. Mm-hmm. When she got married and he walked her down the aisle, he remembered Jesus. Yeah. When she gave him his first grandchild, he remembered the walk with Jesus that changed his life forever. Mm-hmm. What's your final takeaways? Because we're about out of time.
Yeah. One thing I like at the end there is when she wakes up, when his daughter wakes up, Jesus says, "Get this girl something to eat." And I think about the hopeless situations in our life and how Jesus can come, he can dwell in those situations, and he can heal them and restore them. But I think he doesn't only desire to restore those hopeless situations, but he wants to nourish them, right? So it's not only just bringing resurrection in our life, but he wants to say, let me nourish this part of your life now. Let me bless it, and let me kind of make it more fruitful maybe even than it was before.
Yeah. Well, Mitch, this was awesome.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed our time together. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Subscribe to our narrative podcast. Whatnow.church is our website, and we'll see you next time for our next What Now podcast.